A lot of people woke up the morning after the November 4th election expecting a hangover, and instead found out the country might actually still have a pulse. That's pretty much what happened on November 4th. While the headlines said local elections, the results read like a national mood check. And that mood was, actually, democracy would be nice. Republicans spent the night looking like someone told them TikTok was outlawing anger, and Donald Trump immediately declared the losses had absolutely nothing to do with him, which is always the first sign that they absolutely had something to do with him. So let's talk about the blue wave nobody saw coming, except apparently some of the voters. Hello, and welcome to another supplemental episode of Back Porch Files from Your Neighbor on the Left, the podcast about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis, your host. Today we're talking about the November 4th elections. Yes, the off-year elections. The ones pundits usually treat like political filler episodes. The bottle episodes of American democracy, if you will. But this year, the voters turned those filler episodes into almost like a season finale. Across the country, Democrats didn't just hold their ground. They advanced in red areas, purple areas, suburbs that swing harder than a 70s disco. Democrats overperformed. And while these were local and state races, taken together, they sent a message loud enough that even cable news panels couldn't talk over it. Voters aren't buying what the far right is selling. So let's walk through some of the biggest and most surprising Democratic wins. Democrats flipped multiple suburban county boards and municipal seats in areas Trump won handily in 2020 and 2024. These weren't flukes. These were voters choosing stability over chaos, governance over grievance, and basic sanity over whatever the current Republican platform is besides no. Several state houses saw special elections swing blue, leaving Republicans stunned and muttering things like, "We just didn't turn out our voters," which is political speak for people heard what we were offering and decided to go wash their hair instead. There were judicial races. In several states, progressive-leaning judicial candidates performed shockingly well. That's important because courts decide things like reproductive rights cases, voting rights, and whether governors are allowed to just casually ignore the law the way Trump ignores subpoenas. In multiple jurisdictions, voters approved measures expanding healthcare access, strengthening libraries, funding public schools, and protecting reproductive rights. These passed with bipartisan support, another sign that the actual electorate is not nearly as radical as the politicians who claim to represent them. And then there's New York City, which had the highest profile local race of the night. So the victory of Zohran Mamdani, the first Muslim mayor-elect of New York, kicked off a meltdown you could practically hear from space. Mamdani's win wasn't just historic, it was decisive, and it instantly became the biggest lightning rod of far-right outrage. The conspiracy theories, the fear-mongering, the he's going to impose Sharia law, all that nonsense, it flooded every MAGA channel within minutes. Well, I mean, let's be honest, they had been talking about it nonstop in the run-up to the election as well. Because nothing terrifies the right like a competent Muslim progressive winning an election in a city they already think is run by communists and drag queens and whichever Muppet is in charge this week. But no one reacted more dramatically than President Trump. Trump immediately claimed, without evidence, because, of course, that the election was rigged. Then he pivoted to saying that the result had nothing to do with him, which is his go-to move when things go poorly. when things go well, he's the architect. When things go badly, he's never even heard of the people involved. And then he escalated. He threatened to withhold federal funds from New York City because he didn't like the election outcome. Now, let's pause on that for a moment. Can Trump actually withhold federal funds from New York City? The short answer is no, not legally. The longer answer, not legally, not constitutionally, not practically, and not without getting laughed out of multiple courts. Federal funds are not rewards for cities Trump likes and punishments for cities he doesn't. Funding is set by Congress, governed by statute, and protected by court precedent. Trump doesn't have the power to say, you elected someone I don't like, so no more money for you. That's not how any of this works. Unless you're authoritarian, which is kind of the point. He wants people to think he can do this. Strongman theater has always been Trump's favorite genre. But legally, no, he can't. If he tried, New York would sue, win, and probably get the added bonus of a strongly worded judicial opinion explaining federalism to him using very small words. Now, while Trump was melting down, other Republicans offered a variety of reactions. The "we didn't lose actually" camp. This group insists the results don't matter because these were local races, which is funny because when Republicans won local races in 2021 and 2022, the GOP declared them a national referendum on Democrats. So apparently only Republican wins count. Democratic wins are just statistical noise. There was the "it was rigged" crowd. You know this camp. They hear Democrat wins and immediately start printing out affidavits at home like they're coupons. There was the "blame the candidates" faction. These Republicans argued the losing candidates weren't conservative enough because when you're on a sinking ship, the best strategy is clearly to punch a hole in the other side. And then there was the "we need to rethink our messaging" voices. This small minority, usually the ones who can pronounce policy without thinking too hard, admitted the party might be out of step with voters. They likely won't be rewarded for that honesty, by the way. In short, Republicans spent election night cycling through the 5 stages of grief, except acceptance, which for them is a banned word. But let's take a little closer look at some of Trump's various reactions, the classic, predictable, and still wild reactions. First, there's the claim of fraud before results were even finalized. It's like Pavlov's dog, but with subpoenas. Then he would say Democrats only won because of rigged machines, illegals voting, the deep state. It's the same script every time, which is convenient because you can just set your DVR to record his rants and then reuse them whenever you like. Then there was the insistence he's not to blame, and in fact, he's secretly a winner. Trump world is the only place where losing means winning, and being indicted means being innocent, and jury verdicts are just opinions of far-left radicals. And then, of course, there was the retaliation against cities and states that voted blue. And as I mentioned earlier, that's illegal. But he says it anyway because it plays well with the base. And then, finally, there's pretend this doesn't signal any problems for 2026 or 2028. Which is sort of like the doctor saying, yes, you're right, that is a very nasty cough, but it's probably nothing. In short, Trump reacted exactly how you would expect Trump to react if you've ever heard of or met Trump. Now let's zoom out a little bit. These races were local. They weren't federal. They weren't midterms. But in aggregate, they tell us something important about the electorate's mood and about what might be coming in 2026. Voters are rejecting extremism. Whether it's book bans, reproductive rights infringement, attacks on LGBTQ Americans, or, the culture war everything, voters are signaling exhaustion. They want governance, not just grievance. Reproductive rights remain a mobilizing force for Democrats. Anywhere reproductive rights were even adjacent to the conversation, Democrats overperformed. Republicans are stuck with an unpopular position that their base demands and the general public hates. Suburbs continued to shift left. This trend started in 2018 and has not yet reversed. Even with inflation concerns and Republican messaging focused on crime, suburban voters are still gravitating towards Democrats. And Trump's brand is toxic with swing voters. Even when he's not on the ballot, the shadow he casts hurts GOP candidates. Voters associate local Republicans with national dysfunction and anti-democratic rhetoric. And lastly, and this is a big one, Democratic voters showed up a lot for an off-year election. That alone is huge. Historically, Republicans dominate off-year turnout, and that was not the case this time. So looking ahead to the 2026 midterms, what does this mean? Now, a few possibilities. First, if the GOP keeps pushing further right, they risk a backlash even in traditionally conservative districts. Voters want solutions, not spectacle. Democrats have momentum, but only if they keep turnout high. Off-year energy doesn't automatically translate to midterms, but it's a strong sign that the Democratic base is awake. Trump's influence hurts down-ballot Republicans. If he remains the dominant force in the party, many GOP candidates will be forced to choose between appealing to moderates and appealing to MAGA diehards. Historically, trying to do both means doing neither. Issues like reproductive rights, health care, and public education will continue driving voters more than cultural panic campaigns. Republicans keep betting on fear. Voters keep betting on things that actually affect their lives. If Democrats message this correctly, focusing on stability, competence, and protecting democracy, they could see a very strong cycle in 2026. Now, nothing is guaranteed. This is American politics, after all. But November 4th wasn't just a blue ripple. It was more of a blue warning shot. The takeaway from November 4th isn't that Democrats had a good night. It's that voters across the country sent a message. They're tired of the chaos. They're tired of the extremism. They're tired of politicians treating democracy like a hotel minibar, something you use up and never replace. And maybe, just maybe, they're ready to reward the people who actually want to govern. Whether that holds up until 2026 is up to all of us. But for now, at least for one night, democracy got the W. All right, that's it for this week's episode of Back Porch Files and our election recap. I'd like to thank everyone who took the time to download this episode or download all the episodes, whatever you're doing, and listening to the podcast. Please reach out. Looking for feedback, definitely, whether it's positive, negative, questions, suggestions, whatever. You can use any of the social media platforms that the podcast has. Links to all of those are on the podcast Linktree page, and the address of the Linktree page is in the podcast description. We'll be back on Tuesday with another full episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. So until then, stay kind, stay engaged, and have the kind of week you'd wish for others.